Poland's right-wing president, Karol Nawkrocki, has been fighting against its liberal-left Prime Minister Donald Tusk for months. He's vetoed more government bills in 6 months than his predecessor did in 10 years. With Trump backing Nawrocki and the EU fully behind Tusk, could one of Europe's success stories be plunged into political crisis? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, when Karol Nawkrocki won Poland's presidential election last year, tough times for Prime Minister Donald Tusk were anticipated. The right-winger pledged to veto the government's liberal, green and pro-EU programmes, and he's making good on those promises. Tusk is now warning that the country faces a €10 million fine if the president continues to hold up the EU's Digital Services Act, which would allow governments to police social media.
After his election last year, Karol Nawkrocki promised his voters that he'd prioritise relations with Trump's America over the European Union. And he hasn't changed his tune.
Russia is still a threat for Europe, and Donald Trump nowadays is only one leader who can solve this problem, and we have to support him in this process.
But his other Trump-friendly stances are getting Poland in hot water with the EU. He's vetoing the EU's Digital Services Act, a law that lets regulators tell tech firms how to moderate their content, arguing that it would harm free speech. But the European Commission has told Roundtable that this is not the case.
This is a worrying development because these accusations are completely unfounded and complete nonsense. Why? Because the DSA is doing the opposite. We all know it. Freedom of expression is a fundamental right in the European Union, and it's at the core of the Digital Services Act. How exactly? Well, we all know online platforms, they can censor content. They are the ones taking content moderation decisions.
Nawrocki also opposes the EU's Green Deal, the Mercosur trade agreement with South America, and Brussels' wider migration policy. The Polish government, led by Liberal-left Prime Minister Donald Tusk, has warned that blocking the Digital Services Act could risk an EU fine of almost €10 million. As anticipated when he was elected, Nawrocki is taking advantage of all of his presidential powers, having vetoed more bills in 6 months than his predecessor's 10-year term. And Tusk's ruling coalition does not have enough seats in Parliament to overturn these vetoes. So this one-time boxer has started his presidency coming out swinging and not pulling his punches. Yet with heavy hitter Trump in his corner, he's unlikely to throw in the towel just yet.
Well, let's meet our guests. In Warsaw, we have Jadwiga Emilewicz. She is former Deputy Prime Minister of Poland. Also in the Polish capital, we have Nowina-Witkowski. He is a political journalist. And joining us from Washington, we have Alex Crowther, Senior Fellow at the Centre for European Policy Analysts. A very warm welcome to Roundtable to all of you, and great to see you again, Jadwiga. Tell me, your new president has used the power of veto more times in 5 months than his predecessor did in 10 years. Why is he doing this? What's the insight here?
Well, let's start that this is not about the counting, but about the merit of the issues which he is vetoing. You very delicately mention only those which were vetoed, but you haven't mentioned those that has been supported by him, and it was a lot of them mutually. What he vetoed, basically, it was everything what he promised during his campaign. He has been chosen by the Polish citizens because he had promised not to, for instance, to leverage up the taxes, or so everything what he promised and has been submitted by the government to the Chancellery President Office has been rejected by the President, and this is simply why. So this is not the modus operandi accepted by the President Nawrocki to reject every single proposal delivered by the government, because it is simply not true. He accepted a lot of good proposals, submitted by the government. And also, on the other side, he is a member, according to the Polish constitution, he's a part of the executive power in Poland. So he has also his initiative, legislation initiative. So he promised, he answered for the willingness of the government to prepare some solutions, for instance, dedicated to energy prices, which were not accepted by the government. So yes, we are having tensions between government and the parliament and the presidential office, but the parliament should not be surprised, because simply president is fulfilling his will being expressed during the political campaign.
Thanks, Jadwiga. Jan, so you reckon this is no great surprise then? He's doing exactly as he promised during the election last year.
Well, yes, unfortunately, I think that it's not a surprise either to the public, Nawrocki, or to the government. I think that we met also with Jadwiga nearly a year ago, commenting with you and in Warsaw studio on the presidential campaign. Nawrocki won. He won with a strong mandate against the government. He won supported by the opposition party, Law and Justice. He also kind of made a lot of promises indeed also to the on the right side of Law and Justice parties, such as Konfederacja, to mention himself. He submitted to some 10 promises, among them also kind of harmful, I believe, idea that he won't sign any increases in taxes. So he is exercising his veto. This is in the large picture, of course, it's part of this bipartisan struggle, fight between the two sides, Donald Tusk as the head of one side, the PM. And then you also have Kaczynski, who's kind of declining in both health and political power. And on top of that, you have emerging Nawrocki as a sort of aspiring leader who wants to create a sort of right-wing large faction around himself as the leader.
Thank you, Jan. That's a very interesting insight there. Alex, to you, I want to talk about the EU's Digital Services Act. So this is a new EU law that will allow regulators to police how social media companies moderate content, and he's very much against this. Is he being leaned on here by his friend President Trump, perhaps?
Well, definitely the United States is against the Digital Services Act because it actually holds providers responsible for the content on their platforms, which we have refused to do. And because many of the largest platforms are from the United States, from our perspective, it looks like the European Union is targeting the United States, although companies like Alibaba are on the list of 25 online providers. So, yeah, this is part of the whole bigger deal between Poland and the European Union anyway. You know, everybody joined the European Union at the end of the Cold War because this is how you became democratic, right? And you got rid of your communist past. But there have been dynamic tensions. The Poles don't want to give up inherent freedoms, things that they believe belong at the national level. And the European Union, from their perspective, is taking those rights away from them. So this is only part of a bigger picture for the rights of the European Union versus the rights of the state.
Thanks, Alexander. Jadwiga, back to you. This could be very costly for Poland because the European Union is talking of a fine of 9.5 million euro if this law is not passed and he keeps vetoing. So Nawrocki, for all his kind of intent, and you're saying that he's only doing this for good measure and that the Polish public are aware of why he wants to veto so many pieces of legislation, this could be very costly to Poland.
Well, let me bring also one more data before I answer this question, is that the president, according to today poll, actually, today issued in Poland, social polls, the president is gathering the huge social support. So he's on the number one in Poland nowadays, people whom trust Nawrocki. So this is the massive amount of people. He's the leader of the list, so the head of the government. So Prime Minister is far below the Nawrocki's position. So it also should be mentioned here. So if we really believe in democracy, so President Nawrocki is fulfilling his duties. So I think that people in Poland are not afraid of being punished financially if the law is not accepted. So the idea standing behind the veto, Nawrocki's veto, was that, well, we are not against the idea of regulation, but the way of the Polish implementation of this directive is going. It is what we called many times in Europe the gold plating regulatory framework. So once the legislation framework accepted by the Polish government is at least what the European Union has prepared, then probably veto is not going to be transformed any longer and by president.
Thanks, Jadwiga. Jan, I just want to come in on how popular he actually is. Jadwiga reckons that he has the support of the majority of Polish people. Would you go along with that?
As in, I don't have, and some specific data behind me. I would say that he is pretty popular. Don't forget that he's still on his honeymoon period. And of course, he's not, I wouldn't say that, over 60-70% of Poles are endorsing Nawrocki. I would say that this number is far smaller. And I think that he is slightly popular, and he gets his popularity also through this strong opposition to the government, which is not, hugely popular. But at the same time, this is a sort of mutually beneficial setup for the both parties, because Tusk, with his kind of strong opposition to Nawrocki, and with him after this huge defeat of Trzaskowski that he was supporting, with him doing what he was doing, and with Sikorski behind his back also pretty aggressive towards Nawrocki, both parties, so Nawrocki and Tusk, are benefiting politically in terms of political popularity. So yeah, he's fairly popular, but I wouldn't say that he's, extremely popular. It's still has some limits. But when it comes to this veto, and I could explain it more kind of where is he coming from. So President Nawrocki, he, I believe, will never veto something that works against the American interests in both Poland and Europe. As in, he will always veto something that works against the American interests in both Poland in Europe, if he has some power over it, because he simply not only was endorsed by President Trump himself during his campaign, and Trump loves him because he thinks that he's some kind of his political child that he endorsed and who won, but he also comes from this political faction which fully relies on the US and Washington, and they are very hostile towards Berlin, towards Europe, towards making Europe more sovereign, also digitally. They're simply fully going into this American sort of track that they have took a long time ago.
Well, Alexander, just on that, how important is it for the Trump administration to have friends in Europe like Nawrocki? We know the American administration is very close to Viktor Orban's Hungary, and you do seem to have a very good friend there in Warsaw in Nawrocki now.
Well, Donald Trump feels that not only is he putting together Make America Great Again here in the United States, but he's exporting that model around the world. And he shows people like Orban in Hungary or Milei in Argentina as fellow travelers. And so he believes that this is the beginning of a global movement that is going to shift everything over to the right. You're starting to see this play out in Latin America. But this is the end result of the normal left to right swing in that area. But he is intent on exporting it, and he needs friends to help him export that model.
Thanks, Alexander. Jadwiga, you know Karol Nawkrocki. Just give us your impression of the man. What's he like to work with?
I have a privilege to be in the group, among the group of people who supported him at the very beginning of his way towards presidential office. At the very beginning, when nobody really, literally nobody in Poland believed that he's ready to combat other candidate.
So what did you see in him, Jadwiga? Can I ask, what did you see in him at an early stage that made you think this guy is a good candidate to be president of Poland? What was it about him that you thought, wow?
He's highly disciplined, I think, and he's very open-minded, and he's ready to listen, which is not so popular among politicians to listen. They are rather ready to speak than to listen to, and he's listening still. Advisors, and he's open for the arguments, and I think that I would agree with my predecessor from Warsaw. He's now being a person number one on the, let's say, right-wing movement in Poland, not the only party, not the only Law and Justice, the party which supported him, but also others. So he's the real leader and this ranking of trust being presented last days in Poland, when he's the only person with the more than 50% of trust. So and definitely he's number one for the society which recognized itself as a, let's say, right-wing supporters.
Thanks, Jadwiga. Jan, I just want to pick up on a couple of words there that was used by Jadwiga to describe your president: highly disciplined and ready to listen. I could see you shaking your head in the background. Give us your take on him.
Well, I don't know him personally. I can just say that, yeah, for sure, he's highly disciplined. I think that he's very ambitious. I think that he also learns really fast, because when he started off his campaign, he was a completely different person. And I'm sure that Jadwiga will also agree that, in terms of presentation, in terms of public speaking and so on, he was still an amateur, and he kind of ramped up very quickly. And he's doing pretty well. I think that he's very, he made a good career. I think that he is somewhat a person out of nowhere, maybe not necessarily fully out of nowhere, because he held all those different positions. But look, they took him out of somewhere. Kaczynski did not such a long time ago. And now he's even above Kaczynski. He's now, as Jadwiga said it, and I said before, he's like the actual sort of leader, standing above all the right-wing party leaders. He's like the big boss of the right-wing parties and hearts across Poland. So he did well, and he's very well positioned. He's very aggressive towards the government. He's very confident, and he has also a strong position because he has this veto power, and he's got 4.5 years longer at least in Belvedere, the presidential palace. So he's doing well on that. But let's see how this develops. He is really pushing for becoming the sort of leader of the right-wing parties agreement in the next year elections. And let's see how it goes. But there are still some issues with that. There are some issues with Grzegorz Braun, with Law and Justice. So it's not looking everything that fantastically as the Kaczynski and others expected when he won.
Alexander, I want to talk about the European Union then. So we've got some leaders that are causing problems, I guess, for Brussels. You got Fico in Slovakia, Orban in Hungary, and now Nawrocki in Poland. These are people who go against the narrative, what the European Union wants done, blockers, if you like. How much of an issue do you think that is for the leaders in Brussels, for Ursula von der Leyen and everyone else?
Well, I mean, it's a major issue based on the requirements for much of the European Union to have unanimity. And so this is the dynamic tension between Eastern Europe, who really just got their freedoms back. Essentially, Poland was taken over in 1939 by the Nazis, 1945 by the communists, and really have been in control of their own fate since the early 1990s, and they don't want to give that up. So it's you want to be part of the European Union because you want to prove that you're European. On the other hand, you want to maintain as much freedom of maneuver as possible. The elephant in the room that nobody's mentioning is the Russians as well, and they're part of this. The European Union is trying to minimize the Russians' capability to do information operations in Europe.
Thank you, Alexander. Jadwiga, talk to me about the tensions then between your Prime Minister Donald Tusk and your President Nawrocki. This is quite a power battle. Who wins ultimately?
So if I knew that, I would be employed today by one or the second political party, I guess. So I'm not going to answer for this provocation, but I would like just to quickly jump into the train which moved 2 seconds before. I mean, the European, whether the Nawrocki or is pro or anti-European. So this is not that simply. I know the journalist loves the simplification, but this is not that simply.
Well, make it simple first. Make it simple first. Come on.
Right. So this is not that. The question is whether Nawrocki is against Europe or the current European Commission is against Europe. Because if you think about the industry, the German industry, French industry, about the steel miners and workers, which are appealing, presenting statements towards the Commission to say, hold on, just understand the contemporary world, don't follow this direction. So this is not Nawrocki who is telling that. This is the, let's say, old-fashioned European industry who is knocking the doors in Brussels and telling we are not going in a good direction. And I would say that the idea standing behind President Nawrocki approach towards Brussels is not that we are against, because our national interest is to be as close to the core of Europe as it is only possible. And this is well understandable here in the country when the war is behind our doors. So we are the longest border with Ukraine. So with the country where the real war is pending. So we are really rational, and the president is also a rational person. So this is just a brief comment to what has been said before. But what is the political calendar, I would say? We are having a next 2 years to the general election, where we are having quite a lot of tensions inside the government. So Donald Tusk is the leader of the government, which is consisting of 5 other entities from left to right approach. So, and we see that some of those parties are having discussions inside. So today, if I may predict anything, although 2 years in politics is like a huge era, it's like a century. So if I might say, I feel that Donald Tusk is also, let's say, the person which is on the political Polish scene for the 27 years. So this is probably, and President Nawrocki is quite, quite young and a newcomer to the political scene. So taking those 2 points into account and the trust which is standing behind Nawrocki, and what has been said before, that he's learning very fast and performing quite well today, for me, the perception is that this is Nawrocki who is going to play the cards for another decade rather than Donald Tusk.
Thank you, Jadwiga. That is a very interesting point. And Jan, just as we conclude the conversation, just briefly tell me, the average Polish person, how do they feel about the European Union? We see your president vetoing everything now, but the average Pole must realise Poland has done very, very well out of European Union membership.
Yeah, and I think that average Polish person is still supportive of the EU, and they would... it would be a nightmare for them if we lose all the liberties and opportunities that EU provides us with, such as free market, movement of people, movement of labor, etc., etc. But there are some dangerous party on the right, not only Lower Justice, which is, let's say, center-right in this kind of system, but we have such political parties as Konfederacja and Brown's Konfederacja, which are spreading very often disinformation about the EU, and they are sort of fueling this distrust towards the EU across Poles. So I would say that the approach of average Poles is still positive, net positive towards the EU, but increasingly less so also due to political parties which are kind of, very skeptical, if not poll-exit ideology that they are promoting. On top of that, we must also add, and Jadwiga in some way is right, that the EU and the European Commission in particular are not helping ourselves either, because some of the changes and huge reforms that they are introducing are basically not very popular, like the Green Deal that they introduced, or this ETS system that is meant to be introduced. Fortunately, it was postponed. There is a feeling that the EU is introducing things that are not making our lives better, easier, and are basically enabling us to make money and build wealth in an easier and more competitive way. But on the other hand, the opposite, they are introducing regulations that are making our lives tougher, more costly, and very often for some for reasons that people don't understand. So I think it's a double-edged sword, and it's both the European Commission and the internal political parties that are kind of building this anti-European sentiment, which still at the end of the day is not as strong as the pro-European sentiment. But Nawrocki himself, I must say, he's also supportive of this anti-EU idea. So I wouldn't say that he's pro-European. I would say that he's either neutral or Eurosceptical. So that's my take.
Jan, Alexander, and Jadwiga, thank you all so much. Dziękuję. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.